tonic syllables, tone, and intonation phrase. And what is intonation exactly? It's the use of pitch variation in discourse. And what is pitch? We have seen that pitch is the auditory impression created by variation in the rate of vibration of the vocal fold. Intonation is the use of pitch contours over a stretch of speech which often consists of more than one word. An example is the utterance Mary went to the doctor. There are three syllables with primary word stress in this utterance, the penultimate syllable of Mary, the single syllable of when, and the penultimate syllable of doctor. But there is additional pitch movement on the primary stressed syllable of doctor. That stressed syllable is perceptually more prominent than the others and will tend to be longer in duration and louder than the others. Stressed syllable in the utterance. The syllable is said to be the tonic syllable. The word tonic denotes the fact that the syllable is where the tone falls. The tone is the extra pitch movement placed on that syllable. In our example, the tone is a falling tone. The rate of vibration of the vocal fold decreases as the syllable is uttered, resulting in a transition from a higher to a lower pitch. Tone. There are four tones here. The first one is a falling tone. The sample, Mary went to the doctor. The second tone is rising tone. Is Mary pregnant? The third is rise fall tone. Sample, wife, have you been seeing Mary? Husband, no. The fourth, full rise tone. Sample, wife, have you been seeing Mary? Husband, no. A stretch of discourse which contains a tonic syllable is called an intonation phrase or IP, otherwise known as an intonation group. Intonation unit or tone group. It's common to be identified three main features of intonation. First one is the chunking up of stage of speech into IPS, the placing of the tonic on one of the straight syllable of that chunk, and the third, the assignment of a specific tone and the tonic syllable. In example 1, 2, 4, the tonic fall on what is known as the last lexical item or LLI. Word stress. The word can be classified into two word grouping: word of lexical category, typically noun, verb, adjective, and adverb, and word of a functional of or grammatical category such as article, conjunction, preposition, and pronoun. The last lexical item in a synthetic unit is the last noun, verb, adjective, or adverb. For example, in number 1, the ally is the noun doctor, and in number 2 is the adjective pregnant. The following example contain in number 5 an LLI which is a verb, and in number 6 an LL which is an adverb. Number 5, my husband cheat. Number 6, his lover walks gracefully. The LLI may not be the last item and in an IP, as in number 7, Bill gave to her. Here, the last item is a pronoun, which is not a lexical item and thus does not take the tonic. The second last item is a preposition and thus also fail to take the tonic. The third last item is a pronoun, so that two fail to take the tonic. The tonic fall on give, since it is the LLI, but not the last item. In case like this, any syllable which follow the tonic syllable are said to constitute the tail of the IP. After the fall here, the pitch just trail off at a low level into the remaining syllable after the tonic.
Okay, and then departure from the LLI rule. The LLI rule is the default rule for placement of tonic. By default, we mean the point where the tonic is placed if no special circumstances prevail. LLI rule or default rule says that the tone is placed in the last lexical item. The last lexical item means the last noun, the last verb, the last adjective, or the last adverb. And what we will talk about in this subchapter is something that change the placement of tonic. They are contrastive intonation, given information, final temporal adverbials, even sentences, non-lexical item which often take the tonic, clef sentences, deictic and deictic expressions. Okay, and then the verse is contrastive intonation. Contrastive intonation is an intonation to contrast something to the other thing. For example, Mary gave John a camera. No, she didn't give it to him. He gave it to her. The pronoun she and him in the second IP and the pronoun he and her in the third IP are contrasted. And then these are other example of contrastive intonation. John is taking the train to London. It is not contrastive intonation. In this first example, we have LLI rule. Yeah, the default rule. And then in the second and the third example, we have contrastive intonation. John is taking the train to London. John is taking the train to London. Here, train is being contrasted with the other transportation. This utterance can be an answer for this question. What is John taking to London? So train here is stressed because become a new information in this utterance. And then in the third example, John is taking the train to London. John is taking the train to London. Here, John is being contrasted with any other person. This utterance can be an answer for this question. Who is taking the train to London? So John is emphasized for he is the new information in this utterance. John is the new information in this utterance. John and train is called narrow focus because the focus of the utterance is in train and also in John. Only in this vocabulary. But when we see the first example is in the train to London, the whole utterance is the focus. So it's called broad focus. The tonic can be moved onto almost any syllable for contrastive purposes, including affixes. For example, it's not unemployment that will be created. It's employment. Here, an and im are being contrasted by the speaker. The second is given information, as in these examples. We need tomatoes. We've got tomatoes. Here, tomatoes is given information because tomatoes has been mentioned in the first utterance. Because it is given information, so the tonic is moved to the vocabularies before that is called. I mean, the last lexical item before tomatoes, that is called. And then synonym can count as conveying given information, as in these examples. She borrowed Jane's frock. Jane's frock. No, it's Mary's dress. Dress here is a given information because dress has the same meaning as frock. And then presupposition can be conveyed via tonic placement. Have you spoken to John? I don't speak to a racist. B is presupposition is presupposing that John is a racist is information. So the tonic shift from LLI, racist, to the preceding lexical item. Speaker A can impose that presupposition that John is a racist, even if that is open to question. And then the third is final temporal adverbials. It is common to find that LLIs, which are in syntactic units, which have an adverbial function, and which convey information relating to time, fail to take the tonic, as in, John's going to London on Saturday. Here, Saturday is LLI. But since the prepositional phrase on Saturdays is a final temporal adverbial, LI within that adverbial expression fail to take the tonic. If we were to place the tonic on Saturday, that would constitute a case of contrastive intonation. As in, John's going to London on Saturday, as opposed to some other day of the week. As opposed to some other day of the week. When final adverbial expressions are fronted, they tend to form a spirit IP. For example, on Saturday, John's going to London. And then the next is even sentences. These are rather curious. There are short statements which contain intransitive verb, but the tonic fails to fall on the intransitive verb rather than the LLI, as in these examples. The kettle's boiling, the baby's crying, your house is on fire, the sun's come out. One would have expected the tonic to fall on the LLI boiling, crying, and fire, and on the particle and on the particle out. It has been observed that the subject in such sentences do not denote human agents, but why that should affect the tonic placement is far from clear. This seems to be pragmatic for grounding, selecting out of the subject in such cases. And then the next is non-lexical item, which often take the tonic. So what are these non-lexical items? They are the negative equivalents of non-lexical items of someone, something, somewhere, and somebody. Or, for instance, they are no one, nothing, nowhere, and nobody. This non-lexical item or these negative equivalents often take the tonic, as in these examples. I saw no one. I've done nothing. I've done nothing. We're getting nowhere. This interests nobody. One can place the tonic on the non-lexical item someone's, something, somewhere, and somebody, but if the intonation is contrastive, as in, I saw the neighbor in the pine grove this morning. You couldn't have. He's in Paris right now. And then the next is cleft sentences. Cleft sentences take the following form. It's Cotman that we're killed. It was Bill that did it. Clefting is a way of highlighting or bringing into focus a synthetic constituent. One could say, I love John. I love John. But in the cleft version, the contrast between John and anyone else is more emphasized. It's John that I love. It's John that I love. It's more emphasized. Although love is the LLI, the tonic falls on the highlighted item. Here, the material after the highlighted material form the tail of the IP. The hearer knows that the speaker loves someone, so that knowledge is given, and no further tonic is required. And then the last is deictic expression. The word deictic means involved in pointing out, either by literally pointing at something with one's finger while speaking, or bringing something to someone's attention without physically pointing. Deictic expression in English include the demonstrative word this, that, these, and those. These count as function words, so they do not take the tonic when the LLI rule apply, as in the following questions. Could you give me that? Could you give me that? Can I have 5 of those? Can I have 5 of those? In such utterances, it is clear from the context of utterance what that and those are being used to refer. In the first example, a parent may be asking a child to hand her a knife. In the second example, a shopper may be asking a shopkeeper to give her 5 oranges. If the thing being referred to is explicit mention, the LLI rule will assign the tonic to the noun in question, as in, could you give me that knife? Can I have 5 of those oranges? The tonic can fall on deictic expression when they are being used contrastively, as in, could you give me that knife? As of something other knife, as opposed to some other knife. Can I have 5 of those oranges? As opposed to some other varieties of orange.
IPS and synthetic units. synthetic units which normally form a separate IP. There are synthetic units which normally form separate IPs, such as relatively short main clauses. Here, we can see that the intonation tracks the syntax. This is unsurprising since both clauses and IPs convey coherent chunks of information. There is parenticles. Parenticle information is extra, optional information over by the speaker. If parenticles are omitted from a syntactic structure, the structure in question remains grammatically well formed. Let us look at some types of parenticle. The first is non-restrictive relative clauses. For the example, the guys in the car who were hungry ate some sandwiches. Here, the IP boundaries correspond to the commas in the written form of the sentence. The tonic fall on the LLIS in each IP, car, hungry, and sandwiches. The meaning conveyed is that all of the guys in the car were hungry. Thus, the expression non-restrictive relative clause, the range of reference is not restricted. The next is restrictive relative clauses. For the example, the guys in the car who were hungry ate some sandwiches. In the second example, there are only two IPs, as opposite to three in the first. The subject non-phrase is sufficiently long to form a separate IP, but the restrictive relative clause within that non-phrase does not form a separate IP. And the difference in meaning between example 1 and example 2 is that in example 2, it is not necessarily the case that all of the guys in the car were hungry. The meaning is restricted only to the hungry guys in the car. Non-phrase in apposition. Non-phrase are said to be in apposition when they are co-referential, that is, when they are being used to refer to the same person or entity. For the example, Barack Obama, a Democrat politician, is intelligent. For example, other particles. Mary, you're not going to believe this, but Jen is pregnant. Note that parenticles are uttered at a lower pitch rank than the preceding and following IPs. Coordinate constituents. For the sentence coordination, the example, Mary moved to Paris, but John stayed in London. For the verb phrase coordination, the example, John went to the pub and ordered a beer. For adjective phrase coordination, the example, she is very tall and very pretty. For the adverb phrase coordination, the example, he is very well and very quickly. For prepositional phrase coordination, the example, it's either in the fridge or on the table. For the noun phrase coordination, he bought the house on the hill and the woods in the valley. However, when the constituents are short, separate IPs are not always required. For example, she is tall and lanky. He stopped and stared. He bought milk and cheese. This is especially noticeable when coordinate elements have been lexicalized, formed into lexical items, taken to be used to refer to single entities, such as fish and chips, beer and skittle, strawberries and cream. Other coordinate items that are used to refer to what is perceived as a single entity or unit are British pub names. The dog and duck, the fox and hounds, and names of couples like Bill and Mary, Jan and Clive. The couples here are considered to be an item. Items on list. Normally, each item on the list constitutes a spirit tone group. For example, he bought eggs, milk, tomatoes, and ham. Non-vinyl items on a list often take a rising tone. This signal that the list is not yet complete. The next, subordinate clauses. When a sentence contains a subordinate clause, the clause boundary often corresponds to an IP boundary. For example, I'll buy the fish and chips when I go to the shops. And then, I told the new recruit to the company that he was fired. The next, if the material preceding the subordinate clause is relatively short, the subordinate clause need not form a spirit IP. For example, I think she's been shaken. Sentence adverbials. Adverb phrase necessarily have an adverbial function, but other phrase, notably prepositional phrase, can have an adverbial function. It is common to distinguish verb phrase adverbials from sentence adverbials, as in example A and example B respectively. For example A, John went to the interview hopefully. Example B, John went to the interview hopefully. In example A, John was hopeful. In example B, the speaker is hopeful. Notice that in the example B can be replaced with the sentence adverbial in initial position, like hopefully, John went to the interview. In either case, sentence adverbials form a spirit IP and they have the vowel rise tone. For example, hopefully, John went to the interview. And then, John went to the interview, hopefully. The next is pseudoclaps. This takes the syntactic form, what he needs is a bath. It is common for this to form two spirits IPS. For example, what he needs is a bath. And next, the is blank 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 is that construction. For example, the thing is that she's pregnant. My concern is that it's got too big too quickly. This construction is very widespread in spoken English, but informal and formal, or most of these examples are taken from formal interviews with British politicians on BBC TV. Although it is possible not to have an IP boundary after the first is, that is the norm. Syntactic units which do not normally form separate IPs. First, reporting clauses. This abound in novels, but also in everyday speech. In the example 1, he's retired, I think. The example 2, he's retired, I think. Utterance in example 2 conveys less certainly than example 1. And then, subject noun phrase. The old man kicked the dog. But as we saw in earlier, the longer a subject noun phrase, the more likely it is that a spirit IP will be possible. Next, restrictive relative clauses within subject noun phrase. As we have been seen, these do not normally form a spirit IP, as in example 10.311 repeats here, the long subject noun phrase form a spirit IP, but not the relative clause. For example, the guys in the car who were hungry ate some sandwiches. The last, syntactic units which may or may not form separate IPS depending on the sense conveyed. First, take questions. By reverse polarity we mean that the first part is in the positive and the take question in the negative, or vice versa. As in, for example, you're going to do this, aren't you? And then, you're not going to do this, are you? The intonation of reverse polarity take question works as follows: is we form a spirit IP on the take question and place the following tone on it. The take invites agreement. If there is a rising tone on the take, it need not form a spirit IP. For example, in example 1a, she's coming to the party, isn't she? For example 1b, she's not getting married, is she? Here, the take question forms part of the tail of the IP, but the take questions can form a separate IP. For example, in example 2a, she's coming to the party, isn't she? For example 2b, she's not getting married, is she? The difference in conveyed meaning are subtle. In example 1a, the speaker is not entirely certain whether she's coming to the party. In example 1b, the speaker may be expressing surprise or even antagonism. Whereas, in example 2a and 2b, the speaker is a lot less sure and is posing more of a query than one in example 1a and example 1b.
Tonic placement, IP boundaries, and syntax. Tonic placement, IP boundaries, and syntax. Phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs in English have two parts. The first part, which looks like a normal verb, and the second part, which looks like a preposition, and is often called a particle. They can be transitive, which means that they are followed by a direct object, as in he cheated up the waiters, where the waiters is the direct object, or intransitive, which means that no direct object is required, as in he backed down. Learners of English as a foreign language are well advised to learn the intonation of such verbs, since there are so many of them and they occur with high frequency in spoken English. Transitive phrasal verbs. If the direct object noun phrase is phrasal, the tonic falls on the head noun in the noun phrase. The head noun is the noun in a noun phrase which is semantically the most prominent. For example, he cheated up the waiters. He cheated the waiters up. If the direct object noun phrase is a pronoun, the tonic falls on the particle, which is normally shifted so that it follows the direct object. He cheated her up. Intransitive phrasal verbs. These take the tonic on the particle. For example, he backed down. However, many such sentences with intransitive phrasal verbs are even sentences, in which case the tonic is restricted. For example, the plane blew up. The car broke down. Degree adverbials. The most central example of a degree adverbial is the word very. It functions to modify adjectives in adjective phrase and adverb in adverb phrase, as in he is very tall. He talks very slowly. Other degree adverbials include so, incredibly, the middle word bloody, and the stronger F word, as in he is so stupid, he is incredibly arrogant, he is bloody good, he is fucking good. But the tonic can be placed on the degree adverbial for emphasis, as in he is so stupid, he is incredibly arrogant, he is bloody, he is fucking good. There is a use of so in colloquial English which acts as a verb phrase adverbial and takes the tonic with an exclamatory tone, as in, for example, A. Has anyone ever told you that you have wasted your life? You so haven't. B. Why do men dress up as women at fancy dress parties? They so do. C. I'm so not shining shoes. D. You two are so going out with the wrong man. E. That's so not cool, Carol.
The next slide is about tones and syntax. These normally have a falling tone, like where are you going, but not when used equivocally. So these are the dialogue between A and B. The A said, I'm moving to London. And the B answered, where are you moving to? Speaker B here has either not properly heard what A said or is expressing an incredulity. This double-edged question is said to be echoic in that it echoes part or all of what A has just said. Notice that the tone keeps on trailing upwards in the tail of the IB, just as it trails downwards when a tonic syllable before the tail has a falling tone. Declaratives ask questions. We can use syntax to form yes or no question, in which the first auxiliary verb in the main clause is inverted around the subject noun phrase, as in, have they found your mobile? The corresponding declarative statement would have a falling tone, like, they found your mobile. But we can retain the declarative syntactic structure and still ask the question by placing a rising, rather than a falling, tone on the LLI, like, they found your mobile? Declarative structures can be uttered with a fall rise. Example like this dialogue between A and B. The A said, they found my mobile. And the B said, they found your mobile? In using a fall rise, B is expressing surprise that the mobile has been found, or that it is the mobile, as opposed to some other lost object that has been found.
Tonic placement and discourse context. Vocative. Vocative expressions are used for addressing one interlocutor as in the following. A. Nick, it's me. B. It's me, Nick. Here, the speaker assumes that the address or Nick can identify the voice of the person calling, although Nick is expecting a call from that person. Initial vocative from a spread IP. C. Nick, it's me. Final vocative Duna. D. It's me, Nick. If an IP is formed around the final Nick, as in, it's me, Nick, then the word Nick is not interpreted as a vocative. Rather, it is interpreted as the name of the caller. Other meaning difference conflict by IP boundaries. As we seen, the placement of IP boundaries and or the kind of tone we select can convey different in meaning. Consider A. He did he didn't marry her because she was French. He didn't marry her because she was French. This means that he did marry her, but not because she was French. Example B. He didn't marry her because she was French. He didn't marry her because she was French. This means that he didn't marry her, the reason being that she was French.